Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this social value workshop being run by Go for Growth this morning. It's lovely to have so many people joining us today. We have got a number of people booked on the session this morning, so I'll just go through a quick intro. I'll run through the agenda and some housekeeping just as people are joining us. So if you've been to a Go for Growth webinar before, you might know who I am. My name is Gillian Askew. I'm one of three co-founders of Go for Growth, and I'm a procurement professional by trade. So I'm in my 30th year in procurement, spanning both public sector and private sector. Go for Growth are a social enterprise. We are dedicated to marketplace development, to helping the procurement put in the public sector primarily. So commissioners, procurement teams, contracting authorities, etc., connecting those public sector organisations with a very talented marketplace, focusing especially on smaller organisations, micro businesses, sole traders, and also the voluntary sector to try and help those smaller organisations to grow in the public sector. We've got a lot to try and run through this morning in the next 45 minutes. So as always, what I will say is, if you want to chat with me in any more detail or any of the Go for Growth team actually on social value or on any public sector procurement related topic, please do give me a shout outside of this session and we can pop some time in the calendar to have a chat via Teams or Zoom or on the phone or whatever. So please do feel free to get in touch if you want to drill down into anything that we cover today. The session is being recorded this morning, so what you will get as a result of this session, you'll get a copy of the slide deck that I'm using today. There are a couple of, there's one video that we're going to watch, and there is another link to a video. So any live links in there to web pages, videos, etc., they'll be live in the slide deck when it comes out. So the slide deck will come to you and also a copy of the video of the webinar this morning, the recording of the webinar. So usually we aim to get those things out within 48 hours of the event. So you should hopefully have that by close of business tomorrow, Monday at the very latest. We are on Zoom, as always, this morning. So the Q&A functionality and the chat functionality are both enabled. If you would like to, please feel free to introduce yourself on the chat and say hi to everybody. If you want to use the Q&A or the chat functionality for any questions as we go, then please do feel free. I have carved out some time for questions at the end, but don't feel you have to wait. If you've got anything that you want to ask when we're looking at a particular topic, then please do bob it into Q&A or chat. If you're wanting to chat with everybody, just make sure that you change it to everyone as opposed to just hosts and panelists. The copy of the recording will also go on our YouTube channel, and you'll be able to find that through our membership resources on our website as well. So what we're going to cover today, we're obviously thinking about social value in today's session. So we're going to think about how we understand social value. What is it? We're going to look at the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. I don't know if you're familiar with those things. We'll think about developing your own social value narrative, how you demonstrate that social impact that we can create as businesses. And we'll look at some of the tailoring and nuances of what that means in a public sector procurement environment. And then there's just a slide at the end on the TOMs, the themes, outcomes and measures. So these come up quite a lot. So we're just going to explore what they are and how they might be used. But we're going to start the session with just a really quick 1-minute video if I can get it working. So let's move on to that. Hopefully you'll be able to hear it. There is just some music that overplays it, so there is no narrative. So if you can't hear anything, don't worry, it is just background music. No, no, play that. Sorry, I cannot get it to play to stop playing. Let me just reshare the presentation. 1 second. So there we go. Interestingly, on that video, you'll note that it said that the public sector spends around 300 billion a year. I actually saw a report that said that that was 407 billion now. And business that is being directed to SMEs is typically around 20%. And that is too small a number. So we are working really hard, as are the public sector, to increase accessibility for smaller organisations and voluntary sector organisations. But that's still quite a large market in terms of 20% of 407 billion. But there is more to do. Social value is underpinned by some headline legislation. So there is the Public Services Act, this, and it's colloquially known as the Social Value Act of 2012 even. It was assented to law and actually came into force in January 2013. So it's not a new piece of legislation by any stretch. We are, of course, in February 2026, so it's been around for over 13 years in legislation. However, we are really seeing still a continued increase in impact of social value in procurement in terms of weighting. So where you might have seen a 5% weighting to social value, now you're likely to see 10% or even 20% as minimum weighting. And in some parts of the public sector, those minimum weightings are mandated. They're no longer through choice. They are actually mandated as minimum weightings. What it does, the Public Services Act, is it enshrines in law the requirement for those who commission public services to think about and to consider how they can secure wider social, economic, and environmental benefits for the communities in which they serve, both locally and nationally. And so, in practical terms, what that means is it requires contracting authorities before they start the procurement process could secure those kind of social, environmental, socioeconomic benefits, whether they could secure those benefits for stakeholders, for service users, and for communities. The Act is really a tool to help procurement and commissioners get more value for money out of the procurement process. So it encourages engagement with local business communities and the voluntary sector to help design better services from inception, often looking for new or more very innovative solutions to what can be a complex and challenging environment. We've also got something called the National Procurement Policy Statement, which sets out, and I've got more information on this on the next slide, but it pulls together core elements around things like creating new businesses, helping businesses to grow, retaining and creating employment, developing skills in both the marketplace but also in the procurement community. It speaks to tackling climate change, dealing with waste, increasing supplier diversity, those things. And it also emphasises the need for equity of opportunity across supply chains and resilience from both a planetary and a business perspective. And it's important because I think these are reminders to both bidders and colleagues in procurement that it is not a fastest race to the bottom any longer. It isn't always about lowest price wins. So what the Public Services Act, what the National Procurement Policy Statement is saying is that we need to take a broad view of what value for money actually means. What are we buying? Why are we buying it? What does value for money look like? And feel in the context of that procurement. And with the introduction of the Procurement Act 2023 that went live on February the 24th, 2025, new procurements are now governed by the Act. So whilst existing frameworks and contracts let before February 25 may still be governed by the Public Contract Regs of 2015, the European regulations, the Procurement Act is governing anything that's new. In both cases, social value was really clear and well embedded. And we have both regimes at play, but the Procurement Act 2023 by no small margin, actually, is really reinforcing the message of value for money for procurement, and that includes the social impact that procurement will make. And so when it came into force, it came into force on the same day that the regulations came into force. So when the Procurement Act 2023 came into legislation, the National Procurement Policy Statement was also updated. You can click through into the National Procurement Policy Statement and have a read of that. But effectively, what it's doing is setting the strategic priorities for public procurement and how contracting authorities can support economic, social, and environmental requirements, both locally, regionally, and nationally. And so, achieving value for money is an overarching priority. But that has to include consideration of outcomes and quality to avoid waste from both low value and poor quality bids. So it means optimising those public funds over the life cycle of goods, services, and works, including those wider socio-economic and environmental benefits. And you can see on screen the 5 core missions. So they're about kickstarting economic growth. The levelling up agenda all sits behind some of that, making Britain a clean energy superpower. So you will see more emphasis on carbon net zero and carbon reduction through procurements. You can see that we've got Taking Back Our Streets, which is all about safety on our streets, breaking down barriers to opportunity so that everybody has a fair and equitable opportunity, and obviously building an NHS fit for the future. And contracting authorities are encouraged to deliver value for money by driving economic growth, so strengthening supply chains, giving SMEs and VCSEs, and it's very clear that giving SMEs and VCSE a fair chance, creating high quality jobs, championing innovation, delivering social and economic value aligned to government missions is a core golden thread that runs through everything. So there's a strong undercurrent in the National Procurement Policy Statement around accessibility and equity of opportunity, and they are social value in their own right. And there's a real drive to break down barriers to entry. So there are something called procurement policy notes. I don't know if you're familiar with them. There is a whole host of them every year. You can look through what has been issued to date in 2025 and 2026. But there's a procurement policy note 001, which was first issued as the procurement regulations went live. And that talks about SME and VCSE spend targets. Released in February 25, it requires, by mandation, central government bodies to set targets of direct spend with SMEs and VCSEs and to report thereafter on that, those targets and their progress to those targets. Whilst it's voluntary for the wider public sector, local authorities, NHS, policing, etc., it will be interesting, and we are talking to many contracting authorities to see how widely those targets are being adopted across the rest of the public sector. But language can often be really challenging. So you will hear different terminology around social value. It doesn't always make it easier. So some of the terminologies that you might hear, and they've shifted over time, is responsible business, civic responsibility, corporate social responsibility, sustainable social value, circular economy, inclusive economy, sustainability, etc. The green agenda. Language has shifted over time. In the public sector, social value is effectively the umbrella term used in the public sector, covering concepts such as anchor institutions, that circular nature of reusing something rather than remanufacturing or reproducing, and even rather than just simply recycling. Responsible business behaviour, ethical practices, they are all sitting under social value, which is the umbrella term in the public sector. So it's worth just reflecting and reminding ourselves that social value is the terminology, but it hasn't always been. And there might be changes in language and terminology in the future as well. But at the moment, social value is the umbrella term. And effectively, what we're seeing when I talk about those weightings, we're seeing weightings of upwards of 20% in public sector competitions. Even where there is no mandation for a minimum weighting on social value, we are seeing high weightings. And so the importance of social value is increasing within public sector procurement. So it's not an if we do it, it's only how we do it. I'm not going to click through this video because it's a 4-minute video, but we've put together an explainer video because there are some things in public sector that can be confusing. So when we think about public sector social value, what we're really thinking about is what can we deliver in addition to what we're already doing. So when we're bidding for a contract, what's being tested in the social value section is around additionality. It's thinking about not the core services that are being procured through that contract, but it's thinking about the wider benefits that in winning that contract you would be able to deliver as a contractor. And that can be confusing in health and social care settings, for example. So if you are a social enterprise providing support to live at home for vulnerable individuals, then everything you do will have a social implication attached to it. In the procurement, however, in the quality questions, your core services for delivering that will be being tested. But in the social value section, they'll be thinking actually more broadly than just your core services. They'll be thinking about apprenticeships, employment, volunteering. They'll be thinking about how you impact the environment, etc., etc. And so being able to think about what will I do differently as a result of winning this contract, potentially locally, if it's a locally based contract, in addition to my core services and in addition to what I already do from a social impact perspective. So let me just click through. So in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals, I don't know if everyone's familiar with the SDGs. There are 17 Sustainable Development Goals adopted by all United Nations member states back in 2015. You might not see the Sustainable Development Goals explicitly referenced in tenders. You might, but chances are you might also not. But alignment to those Sustainable Development Goals is often there in the background. And what they are doing principally is recognising the need to end poverty and deprivation alongside improving health and education, reducing inequality, spurring economic growth, tackling climate change and protecting the environment. What we don't need to do as businesses or contracting authorities, actually none of us need to address all 17 goals at the same time. It is about relevance and proportionality. So, for example, Go for Growth aligns primarily with Goal 8, decent work and economic growth, and also with clean energy because we have a carbon net zero programme. So those are the two goals in the Sustainable Development Goals that we are principally focused on, and our social impact, both in our core services, but also more broadly, will be centred around those two goals in the main. And they will also have a ripple effect. So what we're doing to help smaller businesses to grow and to scale sustainably over the longer term will also have an impact on things like poverty, will have an impact on things like education and building skills. So there is, although those two goals are our principal goals that we're working on, there will be a ripple effect underneath. And I've got a mapping tool that I'll show you shortly that will help bring that to life in a bit more detail. There is something called the social value model. And I don't know if you are familiar with it, but it exists primarily as guidance for buyers, actually, but it can be really useful for us as bidders and providers looking to provide our goods and services and works to the public sector. It shows effectively how the 5 National Procurement Policy Statement missions translate into practical activities and assessment. And so in kickstarting economic growth, for example, we will be thinking about fair work, skills for growth, and how we in public sector can build resilient, innovative and flexible supply chains. So you might see questions in bids that are aligned to that. So accessibility to SMEs is a core part of that. What does fair work mean? There are fair work charters in local areas. How do we make sure that our local business and voluntary sector communities have the right skills for growth as well as the right opportunities for growth? And we know from the global pandemic that resilience and flexibility is absolutely crucial to our commercial ability to keep the lights on, if that makes sense. How do we build that into our procurements? How do we support our supply chains so that we have sustained economic growth and we have really core resilience should, heaven forbid, we have another issue that hits us like the COVID-19 pandemic did? How do we do that? What does innovation look like? How do we get better? How do we improve? How do we be more effective? How do we make the money go further? But actually, how do we deliver goods and services in the most valuable and effective ways? So, thinking about clean energy superpower, we might think also about procurement practices. You might see questions around your own sustainability. So, what do you do that makes your business more sustainable? And that might be linked to energy specifically. It might be linked to carbon net zero specifically, but it also might be around other sustainable procurement practices as well. So it might be that you have practices and principles in your line of business that allow you to be really creative on how you manage sustainability. We have things like breaking down barriers to opportunity. So, as part of your own social value impacts, it might be that you're thinking about how you can be a positive contribution to the employability agenda. Specifically thinking about those who face the most barriers to employment. So that might be long-term unemployed, that might be people who have been out of the employment market due to illness, coming back to work after having a family. That might be those who have additional needs, etc., etc. So, and that might be not just a direct employment, but that might be work experience, that might be placements, that might be supporting care leavers to gain employability skills like interview skills, CV writing, etc. There are lots of different ways that as businesses that we can impact on the employability agenda. One of those ways, of course, is creating employment opportunities, but there are many more than that as well. And so, when we think about creating a pipeline of opportunities, we're also thinking about underrepresented groups of businesses. We're also thinking about diversity in the supply chain, reducing barriers to entry for all businesses so that the landscape in public procurement is as equitable and as accessible as possible, as many businesses as possible. So if we think about where we focus, so smaller businesses often ask us, but where do we start with this stuff? So this is a slide that my colleagues in Net Positive Futures, who are also co-founders of Go for Growth, this is a slide that they use really often. We know that resources and time are limited. So social value has to be about who we are. We have to own it. It has to matter to us. It has to chime with our values. So we think about who we are, what we do, and what we can realistically offer. And if we think about the sphere model, there are global challenges that sit under the sphere of concern. So these global challenges could be represented by the Sustainable Development Goals, and they're things that we need to be aware of, but they might well lie beyond our direct ability to solve. So they're at macro level, things we need to know about, but actually we can't necessarily impact those things directly. We have the sphere of influence, and that's really shaped by the contract itself. So when we're talking to procurement practitioners about the sphere of influence, we're thinking about what's in scope, what's in budget, what are the opportunities that we have, where can we influence at strategic level? And you can think about that as well in your own business context. Where can we influence something in the short or medium term? What's our leadership practices around that stuff? But where we generally always start is within the sphere of control. What can we do differently today? What can we act on? We know we can't solve everything, but with intelligent and focused action, we can create positive change. So if we think about that sphere of control, what can we actually do? And let's start there and let's do that. Social value is often about the cumulative impact of small actions rather than, excuse me, one big transformational change. So we often talk about the cumulative impact, the super tanker that is social value turns by lots of small things that we all do because they're in our sphere of control and we can act on them and we can do something about them, rather than the big single ticket transformational change item. So when we're talking about how do we develop our own social value contribution, we start by actually keeping things simple and proportionate to who we are. So if you take the Sustainable Development Goal 1, no poverty, as an example, there are millions of people in the United Kingdom living in relative poverty. What can you do about that as an organisation? You can think about fair pay. You can think about living wage. You can think about reducing 0 hours contracts or seasonal work. And you can think about the impacts on poverty that those actions would have. And we ask buyers to commit to fair prices so that there is affordability within the supply chain to be able to deliver things like fair wages, living wages, so that they're affordable and so that we don't have to reduce headcount in order to have better quality employment in our organisations. And if you think back to what I said around social value weightings and quality weightings being higher, the National Procurement Policy Statement being clear that it isn't a fastest race to the bottom, that it isn't lowest price always wins. We are seeing weightings on cost as low as 30, 20%. And in some procurements, cost isn't evaluated at all. In the vast majority, there'll be a cost evaluation, but we are really seeing there was something called meet to match. So the most economically advantageous tender is what contracts were awarded on. That has now changed to most advantageous tender. And the clear message from that is that you don't have to award on price, that it is about the broader value for money piece, and that is proportionate and relevant to that particular contract. So every contract should have had that analysis of what is value. Social value procurement do live in harmony, therefore, when we pursue this rounded view of value for money. And we think about things like prompt payment, supporting supplier cash flow, as well as those outcomes that we're looking at through the contract. So other sustainable development goals include things like quality education, where organisations can support skills development through continued professional development, training, courses, etc., apprenticeships, placements, careers advice, work experience. And Goal 16, which is peace and justice, highlights the importance of ethical supply chain. So we might be based in the United Kingdom, we might be based overseas, we might have suppliers who are based overseas. So thinking about the ethics in those supply chains, thinking about modern slavery, they're things that we can do regardless of the size of business that we are and regardless really of the sector that we're in. Feel a little bit even to have a go at that. So there is a mapping tool that we use, and it's in Excel. And effectively, and I'm happy to share this, effectively all 17 goals have got a sheet of Excel each. And if what we do is we take the UN target. So for no poverty, for example, the UN target is to eradicate extreme poverty for all people everywhere, measured as people living on less than $1.90 a day. What we do is we think about here, what does the target mean to us in the United Kingdom? So 14.5 million people living in relative poverty in 2022. That's 1 in 5 of the population. And it tells us what relative poverty means in there. And so what the minimum wage is from April 2023, we can translate the UN goals into our own interpretation wherever we're based as an organisation, England, Wales, Ireland, Scotland, wherever. What can we then do as a business? We think about that. So we can pay living wage over minimum wage. We can ensure that a fair price is paid for goods and services. We can pay our own suppliers promptly. We can ensure that working conditions for our staff and our suppliers are safe and suitable. We can ensure that our supply chains also pay a fair wage to all of their employees and they pay their suppliers on time as well. And how will that help? Well, it will increase pay for workers. It will help shift families out of poverty, allow them to have a better standard of living, all of those things. So we can use this mapping tool to pick the sustainable development goals that are most relevant to our businesses and then work through what does that mean in the context of where we are? What does that mean to us in the context of our business? And what would be the impact of doing that? And we can use that impact as evidence of our social value commitments. We can use that to measure what we're doing from a social value perspective. And so, on this screen, this is by no means an exhaustive list, but there are some examples of social value that you can think about. And I've run many of these workshops, and there are often those moments where businesses go, but I'm doing a ton of those. I didn't know that that was social value. What we find in smaller organizations is not only is there tons of talent in their core businesses, but actually there's lots of really integral social value practices going on. Often our employees, depending on the size of the business we've got and how many employees we've got, often people in businesses are already doing great things. They might already be volunteering in community projects. So part of my voluntary work is I am currently a trustee for a multi-academy trust based in South Yorkshire and North Nottinghamshire. I'm in my 6th year with them. That's something that I do on a voluntary basis. My organisation knows about that because I lead it, but I wonder if in your organisations, do you know what your employees are doing? Without the mandate from you as an organisation, what are they doing naturally? Because that is part of your social value footprint. You can think about those T-level qualifications, how you might help students come out of the education system with the best possible academic record that they can, but also with the ability to go into the employment market in a really effective way. How do we help those underrepresented groups of young people? It is one of my personal opinions, and it is therefore open to scrutiny. The earlier we can intervene into our young people and add value there, actually, that will pay dividends right the way through adult life. And there's lots of statistical evidence to suggest that early interventions are really crucial. So how can we support young people, especially underrepresented groups, into the workplace? Is it disproportionately more difficult for people in the care system to find suitable employment, or children with special educational needs or disabilities to find employment opportunities? If it is, and it certainly feels like it is, then what can we do as businesses to make positive contribution in that area? Can we visit local schools? Can we give careers advice? Can we work with local businesses ourselves? Other small to medium enterprises, voluntary community and social enterprises? How diverse is our supply base? And how do we as businesses think about our energy footprint? How do we move around? How do we actually use our energy? In Go for Growth, one of our annual reports, we have reduced our carbon footprint by 50%. We rainwater harvest, we use virtual wherever we can, and that doesn't replace in-person meetings or events, but it is our default method. We have offered something like 12,000 hours of free advice to SMEs and VCSEs. You can do things in any business, whether you have an estate or you're a fully remote business, to reduce waste and to be more energy efficient. So there are things that we can all do that's relevant and proportionate to our business to make a social value contribution. And finally, before I and what these National TOMS framework. So TOMS stands for Themes, Outcomes and Measures, and the themes are overarching strategic priorities. The outcomes are the specific changes that we want to see from those themes, and the measures assess whether those outcomes have been achieved. They're often used by local government, sometimes through the social value portal, but not always. But you might well see the national TOMS framework being used in public procurements. The important thing is recognising the TOMS and understanding how they work a bit. So that overarching strategic theme is what the organisation is looking to pursue. That might be no poverty. That might be around employment, local employment, for example. the objectives, therefore, and the goals that the organisation is looking to achieve to contribute to the theme. That might be about creating new local employment or creating new apprenticeships, etc. That is theme NT1 is around employment, and then measuring that. So if you said you were going to create that employment, did you create that employment? Have those outcomes actually been achieved? So that's effectively a framework. There are lots of organisations that don't use the TOMs, so you won't see them in all procurements, but you will see them from time to time in procurements. So it's worth knowing. If they are through the Social Value Portal, the Social Value Portal as an organisation have lots of help and support on their website. And there's lots of free help and support from Social Value Portal as well. So do feel free to visit their website to have a look. And we know that this can feel like a really lonely place. If you're a small business, Go for Growth is a micro social enterprise. There is only a handful of us in our organisation, and it can feel a lonely and challenging place when you are seeking to grow, and especially seeking to grow in the public sector. So Go for Growth is here to help. We are fully funded by our public sector clients. So if you are a supplier or an aspiring supplier to the public sector, there is no cost to any of the support that Go for Growth offers. So please feel free to use it. Our main email address is support@goforgrowth.co.uk. My personal email address is on there as well, and there is a contact number on there. We also have a bookable calendar, so if you want to have a Teams chat with myself, Louise, or Lauren, please feel free to do so. You can book a session with us Monday to Friday, generally speaking 9 till 4. So please do feel free to book there, normally half-hour buckets, but it can often just be really useful to chat to a human being about what it is that you've got questions on, or what it is you're thinking about, or what it is that you're trying to achieve. We have more events like this as well, and you can see them through our events page. You can see them on our website, and you can follow us on LinkedIn. There are some courses that you can have a look at. So if you are interested in learning a bit more about the procurement regulations, how to navigate them as a supplier to the public sector, there is a free self-paced online course, and you can click through that link. And there is more courses coming, but there are a handful of social value courses. So if you're a YPO supplier, or you want to supply YPO, or you're interested in understanding a bit more about how YPO, for example, approach social value, you can go to this course. Same with Rotherham Council, Barnsley Council, and Cheshire West and Chester Council. And there's more coming from the NHS, and more general social value skills and knowledge courses coming soon. So please feel free to take advantage of any or all of those should you want to. And if you want to stay in touch with us, you can sign up to our newsletter. We don't spam. We typically send it out once a quarter. And what we try to have in there is really useful information if you are attempting to grow in the public sector. So please feel free to sign up. But of course, it is not mandatory. And you will get an email from us as a follow-up to this session with the slide deck and the recording. But if you have not opted in to our newsletter, other than anything that's relevant to the event, you shouldn't hear from us. We're really clear that email traffic is massive, and we only want to tell you things that you want to know. So let us know if you want to hear from us or not. And that is it from me. So I will stop sharing my screen and just see if we've got any questions. So the music didn't play in the video. So it was a lovely piece of music, but it wasn't necessarily core to the messaging. So thank you for letting me know. I will look into why it does that. And then SMEs often deliver strong local social value, but many don't have the resources or dedicated bid writing that teams of larger providers have. Tender documentation can be complex and overwhelming, which can discourage SME participation. What practical steps can public sector commissioners take to simplify procurement processes and make tenders more accessible for SMEs without compromising due diligence or social value outcomes? I mean, it's a great question, and it's an area that we focus on with our clients all of the time. And what we talk about is proportionality. So what is the contract? What's the value of it that's going out? What's the risk and complexity? What are you buying? What will the marketplace look like? And when you think about your procurement, how many questions are you asking? How unwieldy are your terms and conditions? What are your selection processes? What do they look like? Will they exclude people? Are you asking for too big a turnover threshold, for example? Are you only encouraging or inviting people who have done this before and have the commercial capability? Is this open to everybody, etc., etc.? So there are lots of steps, actually, really practical steps that public sector commissioners can take. And it all starts with that proportionality. What are you buying? What are the outcomes that are really important to this procurement? Who is the market? And how can we use language and our questions and our procurement to make sure that we are just as accessible to smaller organisations and voluntary sector organisations in the marketplace as we are to those larger counterparts? If your question set is 50 strong and there is 3 weeks to deliver it, then the Federation of Small Businesses, tussle all those reports, Go for Growth, we will all say, actually, that will limit the amount of smaller organisations. So really think about what you need to test in your evaluation and think about how you write your questions so that they are accessible to everybody and not even by accident exclusive. We want to be inclusive, and we want to think about actually how do we encourage those people to engage with competitions. And you're right, pre-market engagement is key. Talking to the market, understanding the market. So there is a function of procurement called category management, and that is where a category manager, a buyer, a procurement person, a commissioner even would be thinking about who the marketplace is, who will deliver this, how do we know what their capacity and capability is, what innovation looks like. So even before pre-market engagement, our approach to understanding what it is that we're procuring should be centred around what we can learn from the marketplace. And then pre-market engagement is one of those tools that buyers have in their toolkit pre-procurement to be able to say, here's what we're thinking. Can we invite comment? Can we share that with you? How does that land? All of that stuff. So there are some tools in the public sector that are really helpful to this. And I was reading a report actually on pre-market engagement. In February last year, there were 22 notices on pre-market engagement. In May last year, there were 831. So there is a shift in the public sector. The public sector is engaging more earlier with the marketplace. And so if you're a provider to the public sector, if you're familiar with the Find a Tender service, the central digital platform, or and therefore opportunities that are above threshold, and for goods and services, that would be a total contract value of 207,720. You'll see those pre-market engagement events being advertised. Where lots of smaller organisations are, and voluntary sector organisations are underneath that threshold. In social care settings, that threshold is much higher. It's around 623,000. But actually, that means that you don't necessarily in law have to issue a pre-market engagement event. But what we would encourage public sector is talk to your market regardless. Know your market as well as you possibly can. So there is a question, and we are just a couple of minutes to time. Is there evidence to suggest that authorities and commissioners are holding providers to account to ensure that they actually deliver on their social value commitments made during the tender stage? I think it's a yes and no answer in my experience, both as a procurement practitioner and as a provider to the public sector. We talk about in procurement the contract management phase, the delivery phase, is absolutely crucial. You can have the best designed commission, the best designed procurement, and if it's not contract managed well, then actually the outcomes may not be realised. There is evidence that good contract management does mean that suppliers are held to account for delivering what they have said they will deliver. There are some areas where that doesn't happen and some gaps in that. So I don't think there's enough consistency, and that's a very personal opinion, but there's perhaps not enough consistency in there. As a provider, what I would say is be prepared always to deliver whatever you write down in your bid. You are contractually obliged to do so. And regardless of whether your contracting authority measures and manages it in the way that they should, I would still advise that you deliver the contract that you intended to deliver and the contract that you won, unless your contracting authority says different. And we've got one final question, and I'm not sure I will be able to answer it because we are at time. How can procurement processes be redesigned to reduce incumbent bias and allow SMEs to compete fairly against large national and international providers? I mean, it comes back to, I think, the proportionality. The procurement process and public procurement is enshrined under those principles of transparency and equity. So every procurement should not have incumbent bias. Every procurement should be open, equitable, and accessible, but proportionately so. Proportionate to the value and the complexity and the risk associated with the procurement. And it really sits with the procurement and the legal teams and the commissioning teams to think about those things in terms of, is this procurement really open, fair, accessible, equitable? And so working through those things as a contracting authority. What there isn't is one specific answer to that. So, Irfan, what I can't say is, here is the one answer, and that's the only answer in town, because actually that is a myriad of different things, and it will be very different on procurement to procurement. Final thing, is there any reporting available to show how the Act PPNs are having demonstrable impact? I don't know, actually, is the honest answer. What we are seeing in the Tussell report is that actually business that's being directed to SMEs has stalled. So it's still about 20%. We never hit the last government's target of 33% of direct engagement. And actually, the median value of work going to SMEs and VCSEs has actually reduced for the first time since 2020. So if you look at the Tussell report and the FSB signed, sealed and delivered report, I think they would be telling you that it's not having the impact that we want it to have, either as public sector or as the provider market. So there is definitely still work to do. And actually, I might be talking about those things in a bit more detail in a later webinar if anybody wants to join. So we are 2 minutes over, which is really unlike a Go for Growth webinar to run over, but those questions were brilliant and really engaging. So thank you so much for taking the time out to come along today. I hope that was a useful session. If anyone wants to chat to us outside of this, please get in touch and we'll get the slides and the recording over to you within the next couple of days, Monday at the very latest. So thank you again and have a good rest of your day, everybody.